Dolores is one of the most mysterious characters in identity lore. She was never a playable character. She doesn't have her own file, a complete story, or even a full biography. And yet, over the years, the developers have left dozens of fascinating details about her behind. Letters, deductions, notes, hidden hints, and fragments of other characters' memories. Hello, my name is Memory. In this video, I'll do my best to piece together the story of Dolores. Dolores is Robbie's older sister, the hunter we all know and play. Together with Robbie, she ends up at the White Sand Street Orphanage, which would later become a psychiatric hospital. But the most tragic part of Dolores' story isn't that she became part of Robbie's tragedy. Dolores was born into a wealthy family. She was very close to her parents and her younger brother. They even had their own family doctor. The family lived in Somerset, and right next door was another family, Mabel Grant and Mr. Grant with their son Steve. Steve was mute, and Mabel constantly watched other children mock and bully her son. That went on until Mabel noticed that her son had become friends with the White family, with Robbie and Dolores. Robbie understood sign language and even stood up for Steve whenever the other boys picked on him. One afternoon, Dolores and Robbie came over to visit Mabel and Steve with a small tent, inviting Steve to go camping with them. They told Mabel that their parents, Mr. and Mrs. White, were busy with an urgent repair job, and that after work they had promised to take the children to the park. While Mabel was looking away, she heard Steve putting sweets into Robbie's bag, while Dolores was making a small ring out of grass to put on Steve's wrist and announce him as Robbie's best friend. But the parents never returned. The next day, a newspaper was delivered to the Grant's house, and Mabel read that Mr. and Mrs. White had died in an accident. From just one look at Mabel's face, Dolores understood that something terrible had happened to her parents. Over the following weeks, Robbie and Dolores lived in the Grant's house. During that time, Dolores did everything she could to help around the house. She cooked meals and cleaned the yard, while also making sure to take care of her younger brother. Robbie often cried, begging to see their parents again. At that time, he was still under 10 years old. But one day, a person appeared at the doorstep of their house who would change their fate. His name was Creature Pearson. He introduced himself as the caretaker of the White Sand Street Orphanage and said that children there were given everything they needed: food, education, and a place they could call home. But Mabel Grant immediately felt that something was wrong with this man. His kindness seemed too perfect. She refused to give Robbie and Dolores away. However, Creature had no intention of giving up. The second time, he didn't come alone. With him was a young girl from the orphanage. She took Dolores by the hand and began telling her how good life was for the children at White Sand Street. She talked about clean beds, hot soup, and how the orphanage took care of them. Hearing about the soup, Robbie quietly asked his sister, "Does it taste like Mom's?" But Mabel noticed something else. There were familiar marks on the girl's face. She recognized her. This girl was one of the orphanage residents who had survived the collapse of the billiard hall. There is a theory that this was the very event where the White family's parents died. Later, it was revealed that the girl's name was Ozzy, who was using the alias Veronica. She survived, but the tragedy left noticeable scars on her face. Seeing this, Mabel realized that the orphanage really was connected to the events that had destroyed her children's lives. But she also understood something else. She couldn't take care of two orphaned children forever, and eventually she decided that maybe White Sand Street really would be the best option for them. Steve cried and begged his mother not to give Robbie and Dolores away, but the decision had already been made, and so the brother and sister ended up in a place that was supposed to become their new home. When Robbie and Dolores arrived at the orphanage, they were completely different. Robbie was a child who couldn't accept the loss of his parents. He cried constantly, asked questions, and hoped that one day his parents would come back. But instead of support, he only received mockery from the caretakers, who called him a crybaby. This detail is confirmed by the diary of one of the orphans who lived in the orphanage. He recalls that Robbie really did cry all the time. But what is much more interesting is what he writes about Dolores. He leaves only one sentence about her: Everything turned out fine with the brother, but his sister, appearances can be deceiving. This is one of the first mysterious details about Dolores. It makes us think that Dolores gave the other children a strange impression of herself. Very quickly, the children realized that Creature's promises were far from reality. The orphanage did not become a safe place. The orphans were forced to work, and some children were sent out to beg for money. Robbie, for example, was cutting branches along the iron fence of the orphanage. And this was only the beginning. The most terrifying event in Dolores' life happened during this period. She lost her arm. The exact circumstances are unknown. We don't know whether it was an accident, a punishment, or the result of experiments being carried out on the children. But one thing is certain, Dolores lost her arm after arriving at the orphanage, while it was under Creature's care. In one of Creature's deductions, there is a diary entry written by one of the orphan girls. She says that Dolores was lucky because she had only lost one arm. This single sentence tells us that there were children whose fate was far worse. That same Veronica, whom Mabel met outside the Grant's house, later mentions that Dolores needs to rest. Another child remembers seeing her carrying dirty bed sheets covered in bloodstains. Despite everything happening around her, Dolores never stopped taking care of Robbie. She kept a diary, and several of its pages have survived. On the very first page, she writes about her younger brother. Robbie was still asking about their parents. He wanted to know where they had gone, but Dolores couldn't tell him the truth. She kept making up new explanations, trying to preserve at least a little hope for him. At the end of the entry, she calls herself a worthless sister, and this is one of the most heartbreaking details of her story, because from the outside it seems that Dolores is doing everything she possibly can, yet she still believes she is not protecting her brother well enough. And it is this very sense of guilt that will become the reason behind many of her later decisions. Sometime later, the White Sand Street Orphanage came under the church's control and gradually turned into a psychiatric hospital. This period was very different from the time when Creature was in charge. The children were no longer forced to do hard labor. They were given clean clothes, proper meals, and the chance to get an education. From Dolores' diary, it's clear that, at first, she truly believed their lives were finally about to get better. After the new staff arrived, doctors, nuns, and priests became part of daily life at the orphanage. The children began praying every day and helped Mr. McAllen keep the place in order. On the second page of Dolores' diary, she writes that doctors were constantly walking through the hallways, but they seemed kind, and the orphanage itself was slowly changing for the better. However, it soon becomes clear that the outward improvements do not mean the children's problems are gone. After the orphanage came under the church's control, many of the children were diagnosed with different mental illnesses, including Robbie and Dolores. They were separated into different rooms, and the brother and sister could no longer stay together all the time. Even so, Robbie kept finding ways to see Dolores. He would often sneak over to her through an old window after curfew. One day, this window almost became the reason for his injury. The supports were in such poor condition that the frame could fall and seriously hurt his fingers. During these meetings, Dolores often told Robbie the story of the juniper tree. This fairy tale became something like a familiar memory from his past, and he constantly asked his sister to tell it again. The children underwent medical procedures, and the doctors tried to control their condition. However, some records show that these treatments caused fear and distrust among the children. In the diary of one of the orphans, there is an entry from February 22nd, where he describes how unfamiliar people began coming to the orphanage at night with medical instruments. Among them were bloodletting tools, mannequins, and other objects connected to medical treatment. The author of the diary specifically mentions Dolores' condition. Dolores looked sick. She kept talking incoherently about bloodletting, electric belts, and mannequins. This entry shows that Dolores' problems did not appear suddenly before the final tragedy. Her condition had been getting worse gradually. Interestingly, when the other children asked her where she knew about these medical instruments from, Dolores answered that she had seen them before at the family doctor's office. One of the most important details in Dolores' story is the medicine she tried to hide from Robbie. From the orphan's records, we learn that Dolores either took the medication instead of her brother or threw it out of the window under the juniper tree. One of the diaries directly confirms this. I saw it with my own eyes. Dolores poured her younger brother's medicine out of the window, right under the juniper tree. Most likely, Dolores believed that she was protecting Robbie from a treatment that could harm him. She didn't trust the doctors and tried to solve the problem herself, even if it meant risking her own health. However, this decision was probably one of the reasons why her condition worsened later. If Dolores really was taking Robbie's medication instead of him, the effects could have gradually built up and affected her mental state. After some time, the orphan's diary entries become much more alarming. One short phrase appears. Dolores started screaming. Didn't she throw away the medicine? This entry shows that the other children noticed the changes in her behavior. They knew that Dolores had been trying to get rid of Robbie's medication, but they didn't understand why she herself had started acting so strangely. At some point, Dolores stopped recognizing Robbie, started screaming, and the staff had to isolate her in a separate room. But Robbie couldn't simply leave his sister behind. He tried to reach her through the window once again, and this attempt became the last one. While he was climbing into Dolores' room, the window came loose and fatally injured him. For Dolores, this loss became the event after which her story completely changed. After Robbie's death, Dolores' story reaches its most tragic part. For her, it was not just the loss of her younger brother, but the final loss of the person she had been trying to hold on for over the years. Sometime later, Dolores writes the last known letter we have, addressed to Robbie, who was already dead. It begins with rather unusual words. "I have been waiting for this day for so long. Tonight is so quiet. Nobody argues with me and nobody gets in my way. Now I can finally take my basket and visit you like a normal person." Most likely, in this letter, Dolores is talking about finally being able to visit her brother's grave. It seems that Robbie was buried there, under the juniper tree. She brings with her a small piece of white bread that she managed to get for him. In the letter, Dolores remembers the time when her family was still alive. She writes about her parents and says that the thing she was most proud of in life was them and her younger brother. These memories show that despite everything that happened, she continued to hold on to the past and to the moments when her family was together. However, the letter becomes more and more disturbing as it goes on. Dolores writes, "I decided to write to you now, while I can still hold a pen and my thoughts remain clear." This phrase shows that she herself noticed the changes in her condition and understood that she was gradually losing the ability to think the way she used to. Special attention should be paid to another line. The White Sand Street Hospital continues to live as if nothing happened. At the end of the letter, she leaves one of the most mysterious phrases. "This hospital is a true hell, so let everything be buried here." Many believe that these words may be connected to the future events that happened in the hospital. After that, Dolores wishes Robbie a happy birthday and ends the letter with the words, "I love you and I will always miss you, your sister." After this, the diary of a volunteer at the psychiatric hospital becomes one of the last sources of information about Dolores. On April 25th, the volunteer receives an order to clean the blood near the window where Robbie died. He writes that no matter how much he tried to wash away the traces, it felt like the smell of blood was still there. On the same day, the staff tells him their version of what happened. According to them, a crazed patient tried to attack the doctors on duty with an axe. This entry is important because it shows that after Robbie's death, the conflict between Dolores and the staff had already begun. However, at this point, the situation could still be controlled. On April 29th, the volunteer notices that Dolores comes to the juniper tree where her brother was buried every day. She tries to dig up Robbie's grave, and when Sister Lorraine attempts to stop her, Dolores becomes aggressive. She scratches, bites, and laughs. After this, Lorraine says that Dolores no longer looks like the girl she used to be. Some time passes, and on May 30th, a short but very important entry appears in the diary. Retribution. Retribution has finally come. The volunteer hears Dolores slowly dragging an axe across the floor. Then heavy strikes can be heard, but the most frightening part is that he writes, "I didn't hear a single scream." It was on this day that the massacre at the White Sand Street Psychiatric Hospital took place. According to the information from Robbie's deduction, the victims were patients and staff members of the hospital. At the same time, Dolores did not even try to escape after what happened. The next day, the volunteer sees the aftermath of the tragedy. The hospital corridors are covered in blood. and Dolores herself looks completely broken. He writes, "I saw Dolores's face twisted with pain." After that, his diary ends with one sentence: "Dolores will not return." What exactly happened to her after the massacre remains unknown to this day. The developers have not revealed whether she died, was punished, or was transferred to another place.